Let's go ahead. Start our
Chapter 8, page 71.
chapter 8, page something.
Chapter 8, Jesus and Support. Inconceivable. It's hard enough to imagine the Son of God, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, lowering himself to leave the glories of heaven for 33 years to immerse himself in the trivial pursuits of us mere mortals. Now, are we also to believe the omnipotent and sovereign God purposely chose to rely on depraved earthlings for his very sustenance? He did. Luke 8, verses 1 to 3. Soon afterwards, he began going around from one city and village to another, proclaiming and preaching the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and sicknesses. Mary, who was called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who were contributing to their support out of their private means. Luke 8, verses 2 to 3. Others gave to Jesus and his ministry. The people around him saw his passion, his mission, and his men, and they wanted to invest. They wanted to free him up to do his work all the time and everywhere he went. Your potential donors may be the same way, wanting to see what you have accomplished in your life and ministry. No need to go into any bragging sessions, but humbly sharing about some of the lives the Lord has allowed you to touch lets them know you will have a good return on investment. The best indicator of what you will accomplish in the future is what you have accomplished in the past. Jesus and his disciples received ongoing support from individuals. The monetary help they were receiving was not from foundation grants, local synagogue mission budgets, or even major donors. No, the list here names 3 specific givers, but also many others who were contributing to their support out of their private means. Luke 8, verse 3. And these were not one-time gifts, but rather ongoing support. The word contributing here in the original language implies continuous action, repeated over and over. This is one verse we point to when we recommend you focus the vast majority of your efforts on asking individuals or couples to invest, and that your request is almost always for monthly giving. They chose to depend on others. He could have done it differently and outfitted his followers with money changers on each hip, cha-ching, and outpour gold coins everywhere. That would have drawn a crowd. So why would the Supreme Lord of the universe, who could snap his fingers and trillions would be at his feet, decide this particular method of funding would be the best? Because Jesus was not into independence, but interdependence. In other words, he wanted to initiate and experience a simultaneous reliance upon God and those around him. He was launching the mysterious, interconnected network called the Body of Christ, where God wants to work in and through us to build up and sustain one another and his work around the world. And even though this concept may fly in the face of us proud, I don't need help from anybody, Americans, we must admit that Jesus thought it up, and we had better practice it. And if Jesus was willing to support his personal and ministry expenses in this manner, but I am not, what does that say about me? Scott Morton weighs in. If it were wrong to be supported by the personal gifts of others, Jesus Christ would not have allowed it in his own ministry. If Jesus became vulnerable enough to be supported by others, you and I must be willing as well. Jesus ministered to others full time. The Bible never records Jesus going back into carpentry once he launched into his ministry. He didn't attempt to work part-time to support himself, but instead was 100% focused on his mission, looking to God and others to cover his personal and ministry expenses. The Apostle Paul does not give us any indication when or where Jesus said this, but sometime during his 3-year public ministry, he said, "The Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel." 1 Corinthians 9, verse 14. Jesus not only taught, but modeled this principle. Maybe you thought a full-time Christian worker raising support for their ministry was simply an option or personal choice. No, Jesus actually commanded us to do so. You may say, I'm just an administrator back at the home office. I really don't preach the gospel. Yes, you do. Not only with your friends and neighbors, but also in and through the ministry you are a part of. Regardless of our particular role, this verse applies to all of us who are part of a ministry seeking to lift up Christ and expand the kingdom of God on earth.
Amen.
Principles from Christ's ministry in Luke 10. At the beginning of Luke 8, Jesus modeled to his men how he wanted them to raise their support and do their ministry. In fact, everything Jesus ever did was at least partly so his disciples could learn how to do it themselves. Then, at the start of Luke 9, he sent the 12 out on their first ministry excursion, briefing them how to fund themselves. Finally, here in Luke 10, Jesus sends out 70 more of his troops on their first short-term missions assignment, and with even greater detail, pulls them together for a mini support-raising training session. Not only did the Savior personally practice what he preached by funding his personal and ministry expenses via others' giving, but trained and raised up generations who followed his example. Luke 10, verses 1 to 8. Now after this, the Lord appointed 70 others, and sent them in pairs ahead of him to every city and place where he himself was going to come. And he was saying to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go, behold, I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no money belt, no bag, no shoes, and greet no one on the way. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace be to this house.' If a man of peace is there, your peace will rest on him. But if not, it will return to you. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give you, for the laborer is worthy of his wages. Do not keep moving from house to house. Don't do it alone." Jesus wisely paired them up in twos for encouragement and accountability. Jesus knew they would need each other, and their teamwork would produce far more than what they could each do on their own. This principle is essential in ministry ventures as well as personal support raising. If you're married, get your spouse involved as much as they are willing and able to. They are probably going to be your greatest asset anyway, whether it's making calls, going on appointments, tracking your gifts, doing the newsletters, or writing thank you notes. Seek to engage your spouse and/or family as much as possible. If you're single, pull in some friends or disciples who can team up with you. Why do anything alone if you could do it with someone else? Keep in mind Solomon's principle of 2 are better than 1, for they have a good return for their labor. Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9. And if you find yourself late one night sitting and folding hundreds of newsletters all by your lonesome, you'll know you haven't quite applied this principle yet. Be prepared for rejection. Jesus warned his disciples about this, saying, "I send you out as lambs in the midst of wolves." Luke 10, verse 3. They would go and search for a hospitable person in that city. When the disciples found that man of peace who would provide room and board, then your peace will rest on him, Jesus said. Luke 10, verse 6. The master even gave the 70 a curse they should call down on the people of a city who rejected their request for support. Luke 10, verses 10 to 16. Though tempted at times, I don't advise this today. Do you remember the first time you shared with your family that you were going into full-time ministry and you would be raising your financial support? Perhaps you had parents or family members who were initially so proud of you for doing God's work, but when they found out you weren't going to be paid a traditional salary, but would be forced to beg for your income, they did a 180 and stared at you as if you were an alien from another planet. Certainly not part of their self-respecting family. Maybe they were skeptical or embarrassed or downright indignant that some sinister group would take advantage of their sweet, innocent daughter or son like that. Shocked that this ministry, like corporations, didn't have a magical pot of profits someplace from which to pay everyone's salaries, they launched into their speech about you needing to properly provide for your family, or the ultra-encouraging, "Don't you dare contact any of our friends at the country club." Yes, sometimes people you think will be excited and supportive of your decision are the very ones who oppose you the most. Whether it's the home church pastor who's disappointed you chose not to work with his particular denomination, or the non-believing sister who's absolutely sure personal support raising must be part of a cult initiation, you will probably experience initial pushback from a few of those closest to you. Be willing to go to people you don't know. Jesus sent them out in pairs, going door to people they did not know, to ask for the food and housing required to carry out their ministry in that city. The master did not reveal to them which houses to go to or how many doors they would have to knock on before they found a willing host. But he did tell them what to say in whatever house they entered. Peace be to this house. Luke 10, verse 5. The disciples were instructed to keep walking, knocking, asking, and waiting to discover which homeowner in that city would be receptive to their request for help. Jesus wanted them to have a big faith, but knew the key was to put them in situations where they needed to make the big asks. Rick came to Christ late in college and did not have any Christian friends, family, or church. On top of that, he lacked confidence and was socially awkward. Rick wanted to go on a summer mission trip to Indonesia with our ministry, but had no contact base at all to raise his $3,500. So he put on his geeky glasses and tie and went door to door on every floor of almost all the office buildings in town. He would request to see the owner or director, introduce himself and his ministry, and ask for $75, $100, or $150 toward his mission of helping Indonesian college students gain a personal relationship with God. He completely raised it, all from people he did not know.
Yeah.
Rick got so fired up about reaching Indonesian students that he wanted to do it full time when he graduated. But now the agency said he must raise $4,600 of support per month to go. He did just that, and again, almost totally from people he hadn't known beforehand. When Rick arrived and began his ministry, he met a young woman who was also a missionary there. They fell in love, got married, and wanted to spend their lives ministering in Asia together. Now, 20 plus years later, and with 4 kids, Rick and his wife are required to raise over $10,000 a month to cover all personal and ministry expenses. As you might guess, almost all these additional givers were people he had not known previously to his meeting with them and asking. I was talking recently to a well-known mission leader who worked with Rick for many years. Without solicitation, he stated, "Rick does the best job raising and maintaining his support team of anyone I've known in my 30 years of ministry." I was stunned. I thought to myself, if Rick, with all his supposed deficiencies and obstacles, can go out from scratch and raise his entire support team from people he did not know, then anyone ought to be able to do so. No excuses. How about you? Are you willing to go anywhere to talk to anyone who will allow you to share about your ministry and opportunity to invest? Are you prepared to strip yourself of any pride or self-importance you may be clinging to in order to embrace the kind of passion, urgency, courage, humility, and plain old hard work that Rick did? I pray so. Build longer-term relationships. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give you. Do not keep moving from house to house. Luke 10, verse 7. Once the disciples found a man of peace who would host them, Jesus commanded them to stay there, accept their hospitality, and to use that home as their base of operations. This concept reinforces the philosophy of support raising we're proposing, whereby each of us should be praying and looking for people who feel strongly enough about us and our ministry that they will want to start giving and stick with us over the long haul. The disciples were not taught to raise their funds by going to the local synagogue for a love offering, or hold bake sales at the bazaar, or pass out pledge cards at council meetings. Instead, they were to go to people's homes and ask them face to face to partner with them. As the ministry expanded and the stay in their host home extended, I'm sure the relationship between the owners and the disciples deepened. I don't think this method of support raising was just a last-minute idea on the part of Jesus. It was a carefully planned out strategy designed to multiply passion for the Lord and his work in the hearts of key citizens in each city. Laborers deserve to be supported. How could Jesus justify this form of religious freeloading on the part of his disciples? Wasn't it a terrible testimony to the townspeople for them to go house to house with their hand out, rather than just look for work and earn their own keep? Apparently, in the mind of God, spiritual work is just as valid and deserving of compensation as any form of physical or mental work. This principle was true for the Levites and repeated here for us. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give you, for the laborer is worthy of his wages. Luke 10, verse 7. Even though these followers of the Lord may have initially felt timid about living off the support of others, they were reminded of Jesus modeling to them in Luke 8. They were not to stand on street corners disheveled with a hungry look on their face. No, they were working hard representing the Savior, and he wanted them to view themselves and their work as noble, essential, eternal, and just as deserving of full compensation as the farmer, blacksmith, or business owner. They could hold their heads high, knowing their mission and its form of funding was right, holy, and biblical. Other New Testament verses that teach this include Matthew 10, verse 10, 1 Timothy 5, verse 18, and 1 Corinthians 9, verse 14. God in the flesh came to earth and chose to live and minister off the ongoing gifts of individuals. Let's, you and I, choose to as well. Chapter 9.
Well, what do you guys think about chapter 8?
I think it was very fiery. But can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can we have those slips or I need slips?
We're working on it.
How do I?
What do you need a slip for?
Because I need to raise report quick.
Have
I need
you-
to start work, I've already got a plan.
Do you already have your presentation ready to
I
go?
don't even care. I'm trusting God. Yeah, pretty much so. I need to do, like, I've already made an appointment with my dad. I got a few other appointments too, and I want to totally do what he's just talking about. I'm gonna go hit the offices, in these big towers.
Okay. But let me ask you this. Do you want to raise the money that you need this month? Or do you want to raise the money that you need
For the rest of
for
your
the
life.
rest of your life?
Well, I need money this month because I have
I understand.
$120-something in my account. I have a phone bill coming. I'm just freaking out.
I understand.
But I have things.
That's
So
good.
yes, I want to raise support for the rest of my life.
So I would say put extra time into going through the steps of preparing yourself for the long term.
So don't jump ahead of God.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, God knows how to provide this month's finances. And I think that there's wisdom in making the most of whatever, connections and opportunities that you have for support. In other words, let's say you get 10 people to support you $25 a month. And you're like, okay, I'm got $250 or what's that?
Yes.
Okay. So, and that can happen because, that was what started happening to me towards the beginning when I just asked people to support me and left it to them to decide how much I might need.
Yeah.
It was $10 a month, $25 a month. When I took some time to prepare and understand then and go through a process, then it was more like $100 to $150 a month. So there's just some key parts of, I would call wisdom, or in other words, strategy that would be important to use in the process of preparing you for that long-term
Okay.
task.
Okay.
So all that to say, if you do want to spend, more time in getting supported more quickly, I would focus that time in, reading ahead, going through the steps that are discussed in the book, preparing a presentation. And yes, I'm hoping to have some slips, if not today, very soon.
I have another question.
Uh-huh.
Would you be willing, or somebody, I need help putting together a presentation. I don't know how to do that. Oh, this book is showing how to do
Yes.
it? Perfect, it's all in my lap. No.
Yep. Now that being said, once you finish reading that part, or not even once you finish, but as you're reading about preparing your presentation, I would, I think you definitely will want to get some help.
Okay.
part of the reason why we're doing this as a class is so that we can be helping each other as we go forward, but I understand you might need to do that on a quicker timeline.
Yeah.
So let me know when you get to that point and we will figure something out. But I would say for now, just continue to literally spend hours a day reading ahead, and you would get through the book in a few days, and then you'd be able to get your presentation ready in a couple more days, and you could be doing those appointments by next week.
Okay,
But it's gonna take a lot of time to get from here to there this week.
okay, all right. That's in process then.
Yes, sir.
When you were going through your support raising teaching or being trained to support it, did God give you visions, inklings, impressions on how to do that that might be palatable for a sister?
I think that kind of stuff is more like the specific leading of who to talk to and what to say. So yeah, as you're putting together your presentation, I don't think it's so much about what did God tell me to do, but listening for what is he telling you to do as you prepare for that. But I think there's, I've shared a little bit, and I was going to wait until we get to that point, but maybe I could do it sooner if, since it might help you, but I was going to share my presentation as an example. So,
Yeah.
and it'll actually be my old presentation because now I need to totally rework it for the school, but I'll give you the open door presentation that I was using.
I love it.
She's kind of in need of money for her bills right away.
Mhm.
So like she talks about her dad as, I'm already jumped on the bandwagon. So can he go to that website and donate to her if he's one of her that's already willing?
Yes, but I'm just saying, like, so this is a very relational approach, right? And there's this thing, this principle of like setting a precedent. So the way that you approach people now can set a precedent for their perspective on supporting you for, indefinitely. So it's kind of like, there's people that started supporting me $25 a month, just for example, that in their mind, that's kind of like what they decided was a good amount or a normal amount or whatever. So now I come back and I say, hey, could you actually support me for $100 a month? It's like, well, geez, that's 4 times as much as I would think, whereas if I just came to him in the beginning and said, this is what I need, and would you be willing to consider $100 a month? That's kind of like, oh, okay, well, is that a sort of a normal thing? And part of the presentation is kind of suggesting that, like, yeah, give or take, $100 a month would be, really, yep. So it's,
What'd you say? It's not bad, it's not good, it's in between.
right.
Okay.
So there's just some things like that that are, I think, what I learned the hard way.
Take it off.
I have about 35 either individuals or families that support me on a regular basis. So that's awesome. If those 35 would have, if I would have made the most of their willingness to support me by being a little bit more strategic and using a little bit more prudence, I think that it would be a different situation now than it has been. Because I mean, if you think of if they were on the average, supporting me for $100 a month, it's like, $3,500 a month. And some of them do more, but a lot of them do less. And part of that's just because I didn't really give them any expectation for what would be, what I would need, basically. So.
Okay.
Last question, Jerry. So like for me, I know I'm not trying to jump ahead because I don't have the needs like Crystal does, but
Mhm.
my sister has a budget, has house payments, all that stuff, and she gets a certain amount of money a month and she has her bills, you know. So the most she can contribute is like 25 a month.
Mhm.
If I've already got those people on my team, can I have them go to that website and start donating? But because they don't have, they're not, I can't go back to them later and expect more because they're out of budget.
Well, I'm just using that as an example. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons to go through the whole book before you start asking people. That's just an example that I learned from personal experience. But it's just, in general, it's like, again, trying to run a marathon when you didn't train for that.
Yeah,
That's the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
analogy
that's
that
a great analogy.
he was trying to give us, and I'm trying to get us to remember
Right,
that going to raise support without training is like trying to run a marathon when you haven't ran for
Got it,
you know, a
that
month.
makes sense.
We'll drop.
What was the other? I forget. There was another, a whole nother.
and also like if you're reaching out to people who are believers, but they don't have a church home that they can participate, you know, I don't know what is ahead in this book, but that's something too that you can bring up, that you can sow into your ministry, you know, because you don't, you know, as far as tithes or,
Right.
you know, like there's so many different ways to look at it that would give them so many different ways of considering. I think it's risky to, I think it's risky to go ahead of God,
Mhm,
you
You're right.
know?
And God keeps telling me
And,
that.
and the motivation, like it can't be the motivation, I gotta get my bills paid, so can you help me out? You know, if your father can help you now to, you know, take care of your needs
Would he not
outside
help
of the
you?
ministry, you know, maybe
Would
that's
that be
something that could be
ministry idea?
approached.
So no, well, so this is my thing, my dad is heavily on meth and has been an alcohol, and we have not a good relationship because he's been taking care of my grandma, which is really about to die. But, he's got a lot of money, and the
That
thing.
was a method, I have a lot of money.
Because my grandma is very
Oh.
wealthy and her husband just died, that just left her everything. So he's just, and it's all going to him. So he told me that on the phone. He says, when I called him and I said, Dad, I would love to share with you this great, you know, and I was like, just trying to win him at least before the appointment. And, because we're not on good terms, because I'll tell you why. Remember in DCF, I was praying that God would intervene in that relationship and break him off and get him away from my grandma, because I was afraid that he was gonna use her, manipulate her, take her money, and because he's on meth and selling drugs and all this other stuff. You know, and so it's really not a good environment at all. But lately, so what I was doing was I actually got the law involved in my dad and my grandma's situation. And I had detectives on it watching him. I've had even the child or adult protective people investigating, making sure that he was doing right by my grandma, because she's got dementia, she's blind, she can't talk. I mean, so many things, you know, because I didn't really know. And he is my abuser. He abused us all my life, right? So I was really afraid. But with that being said, there's me and Jeremiah, my brother, were talking because my brother, my dad does not want to be alone. He's afraid to be alone. And so when grandma dies, he's not gonna have anybody. So he's right now kind of accepting his kids, even though he's afraid because of what I did just recently. He's accepting us around. So that's kind of good. But one thing God has told me is that if by me doing this and having faith and trusting that God's going to use this, it's actually going to be benefit to him to change his heart. And that it's actually going to be a positive thing. That's what my hope is. And that's what I feel like God's doing in the process. But when I went to him and was on the phone, asking him if he would talk to me, he was like, I've been very, very blessed. I've been very, very blessed. And so yes, I would love to hear what you have going on. And I would love to, so I know that he's wanting to at least hear it. And he is mentioning to me that he is blessed. So And part of that conversation was, and to bless others, that's kind of what I said to him, and so he's on that, you know, but whether or not he'll do it, or whether or not he'll do it for a long period of time. But, so that's why I think it's really good that I probably just wait and hold off and just do it. How this book tells me, because I don't want to ruin what God is gonna work on with him. In his heart, right?
Also the same thing that Joanne was saying is maybe if you need that red money or that flow of money, maybe he could help you outside of the ministry, is what she was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think even with that, you know, it's kind of like, sets a precedent in his mind.
Of like that's just, well, already helped you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So.
And that's probably what he would do, because when I was in jail, he never put money on my books, ever. And he always said he would.
Because the whole point of this whole thing is not asking people to help you.
It's
It's
to
inviting
support.
people to join, to partner with you in the work of the ministry.
Participate in the call
Um,
God has. for them.
So
Okay.
I'm not, you know, I hesitate with like one size fits all approaches. I think in general, it's good to do, you know, due diligence, to put together a presentation and really prayerfully go through that process. But on the other hand, yeah, if you feel like God's leading you to step out of that norm, you know, you really don't need the forms at this point. It's all set up online, so someone can give online. So just, I would say, pray about it and
Yeah.
do whatever Jesus says, but yeah, it might be to just spend extra time going through this process and preparing that presentation.
Which she has it right now this month need, can we pray for that need to be met?
Yeah, let's do that. So Father, we just bring to you Crystal's needs.
Yes.
And I don't know everybody else's situation. I know many of us have needs. Naomi and Brenda and others possibly. So Lord, we just bring all of these needs to you. We trust you to provide, Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
And I know that you don't need us to go through this process in order to be able to provide for us.
Yes.
I do believe that you invite us to cooperate with you in the long term. But I also trust that you are fully capable of providing for this month's needs in any way that you choose. So Father, I just pray that you'll increase our faith for you for that. And that we'll not only just try to trust you, but that we'll actually be listening for your leading one step at a time in knowing how to trust you, how to cooperate with you by faith. In Jesus' name. So focusing us back into the chapter a little bit, were you guys surprised about this first section where it talks about how these ladies were not only in with the disciples following Jesus, but many of them who were supporting him and the disciples out of their personal finances? Did you guys see that before?
I saw that, and I did a word study one time about the lady Joanna. But it's surprising to see this in a way, because women back in that culture were given the, you know, opportunity to work. It was like a male dominated, male centered economy. And I just gotta believe that somewhere on the line, God provided means for them that were sustainable and with no promise of replenishment. So I think these had to be three very important faith women to follow the Lord around for 3.5 years. They do that repeatedly. I mean, man,
Not only that, but when you mentioned Joanna, they said that he was Rod Stewart, which is like a caretaker of a maid, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, that's like, and Rod was the enemy, in some ways. That was kind of, he's taking King Rod's money and kind of. That's
Well, it says Joanna, the wife of Chusa, I don't know how you say his name, Herod Stewart. So her husband worked for the king, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, as a steward, that's, I don't know exactly what that looks like. Somehow was caring for the king's possessions, or, in some position of, a caretaker of some sort. So yeah, it's like, that job probably paid pretty well.
Yeah.
And apparently he was okay with his wife giving it to Jesus, wandering around doing ministry. So, but it also says many others who were contributing to their support. And then, continuing to go through, just thinking about Jesus as our model. We've been talking about this in the discipleship class. So the goal is to be like Jesus. And of course, we usually think of that in terms of, morality and character and, relationship with God and ministering to others. But think about the significance of him modeling this
Mhm.
for us.
Mhm. That's amazing. I think it's so awesome how God has worked every single detail. It's so, and they're so tiny, even the littlest, tiniest details of his life is for something big in ours. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was such a big measure. It was like, how impactful is that? Like,
One thing I do notice about all the gospels is no matter what, whether he was eating with tax collectors, every time he was eating, even when they prepared the Lord's Supper, there was never mention of they had to provide for themselves. It seems like we were supposed to assume that it was all provided,
Yeah, and it wasn't even like, he asked them. It was like he expected that. And that's kind of like that's like a reverent type heart, I think. Like when the guy that was in the tree,
Zacchaeus.
yes. Or who was it him? We're
The
gonna
guy
go
in
to
the
your
tree,
house.
yeah, he showed, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
we're gonna go to your house and we're gonna go to your house and you're gonna prepare the meal. Like that, expecting that and then saying to the disciples, go ahead and you're gonna see this person and this is gonna happen and prepare our Passover meal and so on and so forth. It was like he already expected that to happen, and through that expectation, I think for us, through that expectation, that promise is already fulfilled.
I think the other thing to also consider too, Jesus says that one time where he's like, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man does not have a place to lay his head.
Oh,
There was, yes, he was provided for, but he also sacrificed and lived, below his means as well. So I think the whole point here is that trusting God, being willing to suffer for God's sake, but also trusting him to provide according to what he knows that we need, even if it's not what we think that we need or what we want. But yet it's this lifestyle of completely trusting in him. So if he thinks I need 2 meals today instead of 3, and that's fine, then that's what I get. And I think that's where it's a challenge for us, especially in our culture, is that, most of us could go out and get a job if we wanted to. We could, provide those things for ourselves. And so that's the temptation, is if, we don't trust God to provide our needs, or we want more than he's choosing to provide, then we take matters into our own hands. And I think that's
I think
something we're
also,
being challenged not to do.
I think also like with my situation, my current situation right now is stewardship. He's trying to, he definitely wants, when I was working at Domino's, I had so much money coming in that I just was a really rotten spender. And I just accumulated and didn't care because I had so much of it coming in. It was just like, just get out, I didn't care, And that's one thing about Domino's, get money every single day, as much money as Domino's gives. You always had it in your pocket, you were never broke. You never even worried about being broke because you need to go to work tomorrow, But so that kind of, right now, it's like, oh my gosh. And when I had the surgery, it was like, that's the same spot I'm in. And totally not having anything coming in and that fear just setting in, but then being able to relinquish that fear into God's hands and surrendering it and trusting that he has a plan and he is going to provide and with that being said, just that's the bottom, right? Once I develop that, then it's the stewardship. What am I going to do with what he gives me? Then he's going to teach me that, right? So I know it's a process, and I know that right now I'm down here, right? Where he's developing the trust part, and so I know that my fears keep setting in. That's why I went and got that job at Jimmy John's. I went and got that job. I was hired. at least I know I'll get hired somewhere. I can go back to Domino's if I want. But like when you said that, instantly I was convicted.
What's that?
When she said, oh, nobody saw that text. She sent me a text, girl, you can't flip flop. If God told you not to.
She said, God told me that not to get a job to trust him. And then she goes, I'm gonna go to Jimmy John's. I'm like, girl,
Don't flip flop.
I told you not to work, girl. It gets bad if you do.
And then so I instantly prayed about it and instantly I was convicted and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta call Jimmy John's and cancel this. So I did, and they're like, well, thank you, we appreciate your phone call. Nobody ever does that.
Hey, thank you, I'm not coming.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And God doesn't let his children go around begging for bread. And
He's got a food bank for that. No.
praise the Lord for Metro Carey.
A good thing for this, that's worries me, what she just said reminds me of. If you can ask, who will give them a snake if they ask for a fish, right? And ask it and you will receive, and knock on the door, go, that's what everybody will.
Yep.
So we gotta be confident that the Lord will provide it, once we get fully trained in this, so that those doors will be open for us.
That doesn't mean it's gonna be easy.
That's where I'm at now. That's what I was trying to say though, is like my fear keeps on rising up inside of me because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Lending Club just called me today. I owe them, I owe all these places. So that fear just keeps coming up in me to make me want to go and seek other employment or figure things out or go ahead, God.
I know, like, just at the point when I wanted God to do something, like I wanted a car. He showed me in a vision when I wouldn't even pray for a car. My daughter was like, Mom, do you realize that's pride? You're not going to God for what you need. So I'm like, that's pride? This is some years ago. So I'm like, okay. So I went to God and I said, well, Lord, for transportation. I looked at the car and it's the exact same car I have now, but I would have looked at the car because of my credit history. This is like 5 years ago. Next month, the car will be paid for now. But with your credit, it's a high price that you pay when your credit isn't great. So my daughter went with me. I didn't need her to co-sign, but just, come into agreement with this car because I want this car. This car is what God showed me, right? The inside is what he showed me. And so then she says, Mom, I really don't. I see that as a real high payment and just really, like consistency and all that. And then the moment I said, okay, God, I'll keep walking to work. That's my worship time with you. So if it's not the time for me to have it, then I'm good with that. And so as soon as I settled down, a few days later, my daughter takes me to a place to look at the same model car. And I'm like, Di, I gave this up to the Lord. Why are we here? And she said, oh, just drive around, let's just see. And so, but she had already made arrangements to buy me the car. And so, but I have learned that, like she signed for it, I paid for it. But the beautiful thing is, around before my mom died, there was an apostle who said to me, he didn't know me. And he says, oh, we're in a Zoom room. He says, who are you? You. And he points me out. What is your situation? So I'm telling him, oh, God has this for you. God has that for you. And I'm like, yeah, And he says, but the problem is, you're not doing the gift of reciprocity, where you're giving, but you haven't humbled yourself to receive. And that was another like smack down, right? Where people offer and you're like, oh no, I'm good. And you have $5 in the bank or, negative money in the bank. And so when he said that, I really had to get on my knees, repent to the Lord for pride, arrogance, all that stuff, whatever the hindrances were. And because there is a thing of the spirit of, poverty. And you can carry that, and we could be fooled as children of God to think, oh, we're walking in humbleness and stuff like that. We're not greedy for anything, but, we do have needs. And sometimes God will send us help, but we reject the help. So the minute I started to turn around that and was able to say, okay, thank you. And share with people that, God is teaching me and growing me in this, and is when things started coming. So now when I go somewhere, when I was in New Jersey, I was provided for, like abundantly provided, house to stay, house to use for God's glory and all of that. And then when I'm driving back home, stopped in Missouri for one night just to get my breath. And he said, you're a disciple, we're to provide for you. And I'm like, whoa, okay.
Okay, cool.
So I stayed there a week and a half, and then to Vail House. And so God, he will provide. It's in our humbling and accepting help.
But we have to ask. Which is where this comes in.
Ask God.
Yep.
Ask God. And when we're asking others, it's
Trust
God
God.
asking
Yeah.
through us.
Yep.
But unbelief isn't gonna get it fulfilled. Doubt isn't gonna get it fulfilled. Just trust God. Do you trust God if you didn't have your car anymore? Is that gonna deter your walk? No. Is it gonna deter your walk if the things that you have possession of are gone? No. And that's what God needs.
In fact, I thought about selling off everything.
I did.
I have a 14.
I didn't sell, I gave it
I
away.
can sell
Yeah.
for $1,000. I have a mini dishwasher, countertop dishwasher that cost me a lot of money, so that was $300. I got
Put it on Craigslist.
I got an air purifier that was $800. I got a lot of stuff in there I could be selling.
If you don't need it, let these weights go.
I just sold my 4 speakers, my 12s that were in my car, my boom boom. Got $900 for that. My boom boom's gone. Like
We all thank you for that, really.
So.
Yeah, we got
let's-
tired of driving down Washington Basin, where our teeth rattle.
So focusing back in here on the chapter, just wanted to just kind of reiterate a few of these things. So feel free to jump in with comments, but let's focus a little bit more on the material. So we talked about how, Jesus and his disciples chose to depend on others. So I guess we kind of already talked about that, just recognizing that Jesus is modeling for us in this, in the way that he received and was depending on the Father, but the Father providing through others. So then it talks about how Jesus ministered to others full time. So, we don't see him going back and doing carpentry work. So that's maybe another thing that he's modeling, although,
Oh, my goodness. I didn't even, that's big.
What was it?
so,
You didn't, oh.
Yeah,
dude, he
so
wasn't
in that
going
next
back to
section,
doing
it says
side
Jesus-
jobs.
Jesus ministered to others full time. And he says, the Bible never records Jesus going back into carpentry once he launched into his ministry.
Wow, you're right.
Oh, that's big.
And this is a theme in other stories as well. You guys remember the story of Elisha?
Yeah.
When he was called? What happened?
I can't remember.
What about
I thought
Elijah?
James said he
I'll let somebody contribute.
Elisha, anybody remember the story of Elisha being called into ministry?
Well,
He
when
was
when
he-
Elijah when Elijah was called to the Lord, he wouldn't leave him when he finally received the blessing of Elijah, but I know, is Naaman the Syrian what you're referring to? or no?
No, I'm talking about when Elijah first called Elisha to follow him.
Oh, when he was laying in bed and he said, just listen? No, come on now. What are you talking about?
Well, I think.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Samuel,
I am.
which is one of my favorite stories.
I
Okay, so Elijah,
thought it was
So-
Elijah,
Was the old
Elijah,
man, right?
Elijah, and
And never
Elijah.
was a kid? Was it?
wait, what?
Elijah and
So
Elisha.
Elijah or Elijah, whichever one was younger and was a kid, like 9 or something?
Nope.
Oh,
So, okay, so Elijah,
Jumping
so
a lot.
God tells Elijah to
Oh,
call Elisha to anoint him as a prophet to basically take his place, right?
oh, okay.
So Elisha is plowing the fields.
Mhm.
So he has like a yoke of oxen. He's a farmer basically. And so Elijah comes and puts his cloak on Elisha.
Oh.
And Elisha recognizes what's happening is that he's, wants to pass his mantle on. So he's basically, it's almost like Jesus and the disciples saying, come follow me. And Elisha says, first let me go say goodbye to my family. And Elijah's like, do whatever you want, what have I done to you? In other words, like, yeah, if you don't want to follow me, that's fine, And Elisha's like, I'm adding just a little bit to it, but the implication is he's like, oh, I'm supposed to just like leave everything and go.
Drop your
So,
net.
so he chops up the oxen and burns all of his farming equipment to cook the oxen and give to everybody. So it's kind of like, that story we read about the burning the ships. So you have no escape route, right?
Right.
He
Right,
like
yes.
gets rid of everything that
so
he
he
used
can't
to
come back.
do for work so that he has no way to come
Nothing to
back.
Come back to.
Yeah.
Nothing come back to.
Does that mean I have to sell my car?
Well.
I find cars are very helpful for ministry, so maybe not.
Amen.
But if Jesus tells you to sell your car,
I'm
then
lazy.
then definitely go for it.
No, I probably should sell-
Just pray about it.
Yeah.
We're talking about principles, let the Holy Spirit apply them to you as he leads. But on the other hand, it's not a one size fits all thing either, because apparently Paul did. Now, some people just think that Paul did this his whole ministry. I think there's good reason to not understand it that way, but at least on occasion, he made tents. Although if you read what he says about it, the whole point of him making tents was not to provide for himself. It was in a specific situation when he was trying to model hardworking work ethic to the people he was ministering to who were struggling with that. And so that's actually what he says, why he was doing that, not to provide for himself. But anyways, we'll get to that in the next chapter.
Where is that and what are you talking about?
So a lot of people think that because Paul, it talks about Paul making tents.
I don't.
So
Where?
in the New Testament, I don't remember the exact
I don't remember.
book. Do you think I got
this.
the whole thing memorized? I
Yes,
don't
you do,
remember.
apparently.
No, I don't.
I don't remember.
One of these days,
about
maybe.
Google it.
So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about tent making. So it's this whole thing. And if you listen to this book, like he's responding to a lot of different people's opinions about these kinds of things, right? Like, so we'll get into it in this next chapter, but basically the idea of tent making is some people believe that based on Paul, the biblical model is quite the opposite of what he's talking about here. That actually it's more ideal to work ministry part-time and work another job to provide for your needs. And they say this is the whole idea of tent making based on Paul making tents. Anyways, we'll get to that in the next chapter, but let's just tie this one up a little bit more. So principles from Christ's ministry in Luke chapter 10. So this is when he sends out the 70 and he says, you know, talking about basically I'm paraphrasing, but find someone who's willing to let you stay in their house, right? So from that, he says, don't do it alone. So this is, again, something that we'll talk about with accountability. You guys could bring this into your accountability meetings and mentoring meetings as well. You know, someone to process things that you might be struggling with about your support raising, especially with your mentors, but you can even bring that into your accountability, praying for each other with things that you're struggling with as it relates to support raising. But that's one of the principles he points out, because he sent them out 2 by 2, right? 2 by 2. That's the principle there. He says, be prepared for rejection. So in some cases, they were rejected, right? Be willing to go to people you don't know. And that story that he talked about hitting up the people in the office building was awesome. But yeah, I mean, we might start with people that we know, but yeah, that's doesn't have to just be that way.
You know what I thought about doing though?
What's that?
When I was working at the Domino's, just this new Domino's, there's a whole row of churches that is all down Monaco. And one right on the corner of Hampton and Monaco, but then if you keep traveling down, there's like 3 of them. And I thought about, gosh, if I just go to them church, and then the new church I'm going to, Lifegate, which is down over there too. But just going there and talking with the pastor or the lead, whoever, you know, and telling them the story and just sitting down with even like the churches that I don't even know.
Yep, that's another possibility.
That's
Then the last principle was or I guess one of the next principles, building long-term relationships. So again, he says, don't just go from house to house. When you find someone who's willing to support you, just stay there. So one way we could think of that translating to our situation is these being long-term relationships. And then finally, just the principle that the laborers are worthy of their hire. This is not begging for money. This is not only everything else we've been talking about. It's a faith, it's trusting God to provide and inviting people to cooperate with him in that. But just as, I kind of think about it this way. How many of us have worked a job and just trust that the employer is going to pay us our wages, right? I mean, maybe we've had certain circumstances where, you know, we had a bad work situation, we didn't get paid, but for the most part, we don't even question it. So if God has called us to work for him and we trust, it's kind of like the same thing like Jason was talking about that Jesus said with fathers. He says, if you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will Father in heaven? Well, if we trust our evil, you know, compared to God, right? Employers, just mere humans to pay us our wages, how much more will God, the honest employer, if ever there was one, like he says, don't withhold wages from your workers. Andy was talking about that on Sunday, right?
Yes, yes.
So do you guys think that God will like go against his own command?
No. I think,
You see what I'm saying?
Based on that, I have Rick hope that all our monthly needs, present and future will be met. He's not a withholder.
So we may not know how that's going to happen. Support raising is one way that we can cooperate with him in that, but the bottom line is, if we're working for him, we can trust him to pay us our wages, whatever he determines those to be. So
I want to put all these in my presentation.
that's gonna be a long presentation. You can just be like, hey, I want you to consider supporting me. Read this book and then let me know.
Yeah. Tonight.
Don't know what to
With
do
you
to
tomorrow.
support
All right, let's try to do at least one more chapter here.
Okay.
Paul, the mobilizer. Paul the apostle did more for the early church than anyone. 3 trips across Asia, countless converts, disciples, and churches planted, all while enduring persecution, all while living off support. There's a lot we can learn from how Paul went about funding his life and ministry. It seemed everywhere he went, he was seeking to raise up people and money to take the gospel where it had not yet gone. Let's see how he operated. Paul, the tent maker? You might have someone respond to your support request by asking, why don't you go out and do your ministry the biblical way? They confidently proclaim, Paul was a tent maker and didn't raise support. He paid his own way, and you should too. Before you succumb to that guilt trip, look at the New Testament and understand there are only 3 places where Paul made tents, with a specific ministry objective in mind each time. Thessalonica, 2 Thessalonians 3, verses 8 to 9. Even though Paul spent only 2 to 3 weeks with this young church, he immediately recognized them as being lazy and even using their preoccupation with the second coming of Christ as an excuse not to work. As a result, Paul felt the need to model what it meant to work hard. Ephesus, Acts 20, verses 33 to 34. Paul's ministry there caused his converts to quit buying idols of the goddess Diana. Consequently, if he had accepted financial gifts from believers there, he might have been accused of putting the myriad of heathen craftsmen out of business for personal gain. He chose to forego support for a brief time in order to protect his testimony and win the lost. Corinth, Acts, chapter 18, verses 4 to 5. Paul was temporarily making tents and thus only able to preach on Sabbaths. But when Silas and Timothy arrived with financial support, he immediately transitioned from tent making to disciple making and began devoting all of his time exclusively to preaching. In 1 Corinthians 9, Paul zealously upheld his right to be supported by the Corinthians, but because of their immaturity, including accusing Paul of preaching for profit, he briefly chose to support himself to be above reproach. He later questioned his no-ask approach in 2 Corinthians 11, verses 7 to 9, wondering aloud if he had made a mistake because he had ministered to the Corinthians without asking them to contribute. Paul did occasionally secure a regular job for the sake of the gospel. In the final analysis, it's clear the apostle's preferred mode of operation was always full-time ministry. He had a conviction, as should we, that he was willing to do anything to get the gospel out, including occasionally stitching a tent or two. This is in no way meant to disparage bivocational pastors or missionaries in closed countries who can only stay if they have valid employment. But even many of them have financial support teams back home. Paul believed he and his ministry deserved support. Seldom have I sensed Paul was angry or defensive, but in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 1 to 18, we seem to get a double-barreled shotgun of both. He was tired of all the false accusations the carnal Corinthian church threw at him. One of the ongoing claims was that the apostle was preaching the gospel in order to get rich. Paul spends most of this chapter laying out a biblical and logical foundation of why he and other Christian workers deserve to be financially supported. First, he raises a series of rhetorical questions, exposing the Corinthians' hypocrisy toward him. Then he sets out to prove his right to live and minister from their gifts, rather than a secular job. In verses 7 to 10, Paul uses several metaphors to demonstrate his rationale. The soldier has the right to have his expenses paid. The farmer should get to eat some of the fruit he produces. The shepherd should get to drink some of his livestock's milk. The apostle even pulls out two concepts from the Old Testament to make his point. The ox that is threshing should not be muzzled. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 9, implying he should be fed well to allow him to continue to work. The priest who is serving in the temple should get his share of the sacrifice, verse 13, implying the Jews certainly care for their spiritual leaders. Shouldn't the Christians take note and do likewise? Ellis Goldstein teaches biblical support raising from both the Old and New Testaments. It may look different, but the principles are the same, he asserts. For him, the bottom line is the Bible consistently teaches the community gives to those called to full-time ministry. This fascinating mix of questions, illustrations, and verses in 1 Corinthians 9 all lead up to the real kicker in verse 14, where Paul recites Jesus' command for Christian workers to live off the support of others. In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 14. It surely seems clear that we are required to follow the example of Jesus and now Paul to form partnerships with givers as we fulfill our ministry. Paul felt guilty for not asking. When Paul was challenging the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 11 about his right to be supported by them, he was debating with himself as well. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted because I preached the gospel of God to you without charge? 2 Corinthians 11, verse 7. Paul is wondering aloud whether he did the right thing by ministering to the Corinthians, but not asking them to invest in his work. Interestingly, this is the model that many of us operate by. We raise support from family, friends, and churches, and then go to a different location to minister to a group of people who won't or can't support us yet. It seemed that Paul evaluated situations city by city as to how he would choose to fund himself there. In this case, the carnality and confusion of the Corinthians and their false prophets was obvious. At the same time, some of them were railing on Paul because they thought he was preaching to make a profit. Others, who knew he wasn't taking any compensation for his ministry, were busy undermining his credibility because he wasn't charging them. In that culture, the Greeks attached value to an orator's message by how much they charged. Paul was constantly trying to walk a fine line between these two groups and their constant accusations. Paul used his communication and travel to raise support. In AD 57, while he was still in Corinth, Paul wrote a long letter to the church at Rome, a city he had never visited. He penned this theological masterpiece for several reasons, including his long-standing pattern of intercession on their behalf, Romans 1, verses 9 to 10. His desire to give the believers there a detailed explanation of the gospel, Romans 1, verse 15, but also to raise support from them, Romans 15, 20 to 29. In Romans chapter 15, he states he had already preached the gospel in all the regions in his area and now felt led to head west to find new unreached groups. And in verse 24 writes, "Whenever I go to Spain, for I hope to see you in passing and to be helped on my way there by you, when I have first enjoyed your company for a while." My pastor shared this about Romans. Paul wrote to the believers in Rome, setting forth the gospel in a clear and compelling manner, in order to prepare them for his visit and gain their support as they traveled to take the gospel to Spain. I have for years thought of Romans as a support-raising letter. Paul asked for support for the benefit of the giver. Even though Paul did not appear to own a home or a retirement fund, he possessed a supernatural peace and satisfaction very few of us have, declaring, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content." Philippians 4, verse 11. He was thankful to the believers for their financial support, but he did not ask them to give because he had needs. This is how he put it. "Not that I seek the gift itself, but I seek for the profit which increases to your account."
Amen.
Philippians 4, verse 17.
Yes.
Paul understood the power of making the God ask to supply him, knowing his Father's heavenly bank was full of glorious riches that could fill and refill all that he needed. And ultimately, Paul didn't need anything. His motive in asking was strictly for the Philippians' benefit. But Paul's main burden here was to help the Philippians understand vertical giving. They needed to learn to look up to make their God ask, seeking the Lord's direction as to where they should invest. Whether the believers understood it or not, Paul was doing them a huge favor by helping them move some of their earthly treasure to their heavenly bank account. He assured them that as a result of their generosity, God will surely supply all of their future needs from his heavenly bank. Philippians 4, verse 19. For this reason, I love what Cruise veteran support trainer Steve Rentz calls Paul, a treasure transplanter. One of the major callings Paul had in life was not just to mobilize people, but also to raise resources for expanding and extending the kingdom. He was willing to risk relationships as well as his life to ask and challenge people to give, not to him, but to Christ's work through him. He sought to build this same brand of selflessness into his key men, evidenced by his parting exhortation to Titus for him to help Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their way so that nothing is lacking for them. Titus 3, verse 13. We must commit to spending the rest of our lives being treasure transplanters in order to help people move from just the temporal, man-made, horizontal buying and selling to the eternal, God-designed vertical giving and receiving. Let's aid believers in transferring huge portions of their earthly gains to their heavenly bank. Let's allow them to enjoy those rewards and multiplying dividends forever. Let's commit to raising up others who have the same sacrificial mindset as you do. You are a mobilizer. You are not raising support, but supporters. Technically, we are supporter raising. We are raising people, not money. Andrew Knight, support trainer for Campus Outreach. Like the Apostle Paul, you and I should focus on mobilizing people and their resources to the person and purposes of Jesus Christ. We are not as much support raising as we are supporter raising. Joe Michie, creative director for the Center for Mission Mobilization, views his support raising efforts primarily as mobilizing people. As he asks others to partner with him and his ministry through prayer and finances, he seeks to help them see greater meaning in their daily work, play a vital role in kingdom work they had not previously envisioned or seen as possible, live more strategically by encouraging them to develop goals for their giving, partner not only with him, but his ministry, to pray as well as give. In fact, Joe actually looks for ways to begin discipling his supporters. He prays for opportunities to expand their vision by growing their knowledge of the work God is doing around the world. He encourages his supporters to ask their community group and church to adopt an unreached people group. Joe attempts to help them find practical ways to pray for specific peoples around the world. He shows them opportunities to serve through short-term mission trips. Joe is just trying to draw them into deeper levels of the world Christian lifestyle. How about you? What if you were to start viewing yourself as a mobilizer? Not just moving people's finances from one bank to another, but moving their hearts from a temporal focus to an eternal one. Don't be satisfied with just becoming a treasure transplanter, but stretch out there to mobilize your supporters for kingdom purposes. Embrace the fact that you and I are nothing less than frontline mobilizers. Your fundraising efforts then become getting in the trenches every day, having one-on-one, face-to-face mobilization appointments, seeking to align God, God's people, and your God-given ministry. You are a spirit-filled supporter raiser. For that kind of perspective, that kind of power, those kind of results, you are definitely going to need to regularly make the God ask.
Amen. Regularly.
Chapter
So yeah, like I said, this kind of got into the whole tent maker thing. Was that something you guys had heard of before, as far as that whole perspective of tent making?
I never heard of it.
I never heard it, but I did when someone would want to beat down a homeless person that's unemployed. Jesus was a carpenter, get a job. You know, I heard things like that, you know, as
Right.
a young believer. And Jesus forsook that occupation at age 30. So I
Yep.
guess his brothers continued on in the family business after he left.
So we see similar principles than what we've already looked at. You know, Paul believed he and his ministry deserved support, so he was familiar with that principle that the worker is worthy of his hire. It says Paul felt guilty for not asking. What do you think that's about? So in that one particular, in one of his letters, he says, you know, he's like second guessing his choice to not rely on the people in that community. Why do you think he would feel guilty or question that?
Feeling guilty because they are missing out on their blessing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And not just the blessing, but even just
The
the,
opportunity to be,
that could have
support.
stunted their growth in maturity. You know,
Doesn't it say God loves a cheerful giver?
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm. And then that kind of goes hand in hand with that, the section where he says Paul asked for support for the benefit of the giver. So what do you guys think what's the implication of that for our support raising?
Just
So it
same-
says, Paul asked for support for the benefit of the giver. So I'm
Same
saying,
thing she said, you know, you're stealing the blessing. If you don't ask, they can't give, and they get blessed by their giving.
so is that why you wanted to hurry up and start asking people?
No, exactly. Dang it.
I gotta get them their blessing quick. Sorry.
Yes, he buys me a new phone.
My bad.
I need to pay my car insurance. No. My cell phone, it's a really expensive bill. No.
So yeah, this is a little bit challenging. It's easy to just say like, oh yeah, I'm doing it for their blessing, but I just want to encourage us to really be asking God to help us think a little bit differently about this. We're going to need him to really put that in our hearts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah.
How do you want us to think differently about it?
I'm just saying it's
Yeah, I guess so.
it's easy to just think about it in terms of like, you know, the benefit for us. We need
Oh, okay.
we need
okay.
money and there's legitimacy to that. Like we've been saying, the worker is worthy of his hire.
Mhm.
But I think it has to be more than just that. And so that's kind of what we're talking about in this moment with that section that where you talked about Paul doing this for the benefit of the people that were supporting him. So I'm not saying that it's wrong to think about it in terms of, you know, trusting God to provide for our needs and that he's, you know, if we do the work that he's called us to, that we can, you know, we deserve to be paid just like any employee.
Right.
But I'm just saying, like, taking it a step further than that, and especially as we ask specific people, yes, we're asking God, you know, there's that whole God ask part of it, where we're not just asking them, we're asking God. But just, I think it just is a different way of approaching people, and it puts something else on our radar that might lead to all kinds of, you know, ministry fruit. So for example, I was, you know, meeting with a supporter, and I don't remember like what the specific scenario was, but, you know, we're catching up. I'm telling him about, you know, what's new and all that stuff. But then there was just some things that had nothing to do with support raising that I felt like God was putting on my heart to minister to him related to, you know, his personal life and family. I don't even remember exactly what it was, and I would want to keep it confidential even if I did. But yeah, just in that time, you know, we got together for lunch, and yeah, it was just an opportunity to minister to him completely, you know, separate from the whole support raising relationship. So I just think that if it's really in our heart to bless this person, to minister to them as we find opportunities while we're going through the steps of support raising, it just opens up that much more that God can do. Whereas if we're just focused on the financial aspect of it and our needs, it just puts us in a different perspective. And we could potentially miss out on a lot of opportunities that God might want to use us to minister to those people. So,
Right.
yes, ma'am.
So my next thought is, well, my thought is that. So say you get a lot of supporters, right? Or you get some supporters, right? And you gotta keep them updated on your progress and what's going on, right?
Ideally.
Well, so. That's where I'm at. So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, okay, so you're fully in ministry. Well, pretty soon it comes to ministry is just giving them updates. Giving them updates.
You could call it a newsletter.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, if you have like so many supporters, like a lot of support or whatever, that whole month is gonna be thinking about getting these newsletters
Well,
out to
it's
these
one,
people.
it's one letter on an email to all these people, unless they all want
Oh,
paper.
Oh,
copies.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
you're not gonna
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, you
You
can
do
do
one
an
letter
email
and
newsletter
send it all
or
to
print it.
okay.
people.
Yeah, there's
Send one
different
out
ways
to
you can do it.
50 people.
For the most part, I've done printed newsletters, and yeah, it's a lot of work.
And then stuffing them and then, okay.
Yeah.
And there's benefits to
A lot
doing
of people like, email.
Okay.
print too, because well, especially like when we first started, when I was working with Open Door and we didn't have online giving, then in the newsletter, I would also include, one of those cards and
Oh.
so it was a way for them to respond to give. Fortunately now you could just send an email with a link, but it's cheaper if they do it through the mail, but that's a totally separate issue. But no, I think that's something that we'll talk about as we get further along, because it's something that, I don't do very well, and it's something that there's a lot of different ways you could do it. But I think the ideal is that you do have some kind of whether it be email, which is the easiest way, update, I would say ideally at least quarterly at the least,
Okay.
Don't do it every month.
I used to try to do every month, that didn't
Well,
happen
that's
for
what
me.
Lena and Bernie used to do was.
Yeah, I know. So
Back then,
every
that's-
month would be
I remember.
awesome too, and then I would say like also, somewhat regularly meeting with them in person, or at least a phone call or something along those lines would also be ideal. And again, it's not just like, oh, this is what you got to do so that they'll keep supporting you. It's an opportunity to minister to them as well. So,
Can I ask, two things? Kim, do we have access to our print shop? To get things cheaply printed?
we can use, we do have our own account with the printer here. So yeah, that's probably gonna be the cheapest way to do that.
Are they hiring?
Oh, no, I'm just talking about the,
Work there, get it free. Right.
No.
wait, what kind of printing are you talking about?
Oh,
I thought you were just talking about like printing stuff off.
I'm talking
Like
about
letters
the
or whatever.
newsletters
Yeah.
and any type of thing we want in hard copy to send
How
out.
much does
Can we
George pay for
use that? That,
I think
You know.
15 cents for each copy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys are talking about two different things. So,
Yeah.
so Open Door Ministries has a t-shirt print
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh.
So that's
okay.
totally separate than what we're talking
They're in
about.
Conveyor House.
No, I'm
She's just,
talking about the print shop, making t-shirts.
Oh,
It's a Christian ministry. Anyway,
there's actually all kinds of, ministries that have openings like, the houses and all that kind of stuff.
I
But yeah,
applied for a
t-shirt.
house and they've all rejected me.
Okay. Well, maybe
Oh.
that's not where Jesus has you, but I think what Joanne was talking about is like our access to the printer to print newsletters or those kinds of things. So yeah, we have our own account. So ideally, if you have a computer, bringing it, and I can try to help you get set up, because you got to download the driver and all that stuff. So we do have to pay for all of that through our general fund, but it's going to be cheaper than any other way that you would print stuff.
Okay, my next question is, are we 501c?
We are organized as a church, which is, does have 501c3 status.
So
We don't,
the
so,
school is, we ourselves are not.
So when people contribute to us, do they get that
Yes.
501c right?
so Telos School of Discipleship is its own organization. It's organized as a church. We're not like a charitable nonprofit. We are a church ministry. We're a different model of church, and that's a whole nother story that we could get into. But the way it works is that churches are automatically considered a 501c3. You don't have to apply for the government letter to qualify for that. So, and there's reasons why we haven't done that. We can do that, but we haven't chose to. And there's a whole, that's a whole nother conversation why we're choosing not to do that at this time. But if your supporters are asking about that, let them know that Telos is a church, and so their donations will be tax deductible. Yep.
Okay, so they'll make the payment to you in the name of any of us.
Yes.
Now, can we have, instead of you paying it, can you make the payment to us under our ministry?
You have a ministry set up?
I'm thinking.
Okay, so that's totally up to you if that's, if you want to do that. So what the whole point,
Like, instead of you making the payment to Joanne,
Mhm.
can you make it a payment to?
Oh, can Telos pay instead of to you, pay to your ministry?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't think that would be a problem. I thought you were saying like, as you're doing support raising, can you just have supporters donate
No,
to you
I'm not
personally?
saying to
or
be
to your
separate,
ministry or
but
whatever.
through your ministry to our ministry.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a problem. I don't really know a whole lot about the legal implications, so I can try to double check and see if there's any reason why that would be, but I don't see any reason why it would. But yeah, so that's kind of the whole thing though, is for the reason why you want people to support you through Telos is so that, first of all, it's tax exempt, and that it's also paid out as wages, and we're filing the taxes that an employer normally would, so we're taking taxes out and all that stuff.
501.
It's called 501c3,
So they can use it as a.
so that
tax write-off.
your supporters can get a tax deduction.
So how does that work for you? Because if you're paying it as an employer's paying wages,
Mhm.
I retired as a human resource director. So how does that work for you? Because there's costs that you incur as an employer, be it to offset any federal like unemployment, disability, all of that.
Yep. So that's why I was letting you guys know. I don't know if you weren't here that week, but one of our sessions last week, I was saying, we aren't charging tuition. We're committed to that. However, we do have costs. So if anybody wants to chip in,
Donate.
feel free. We are organized as a church. Obviously, we're not meeting on Sundays, so it's a different model of church. We're not taking up offerings.
Right.
But we do have expenses. And so if you guys want to give to the ministry for the general fund, definitely feel free.
I think I'll
And
start
God's
using my
already-
tithing for that. I think, because I tithe to Open Door, but maybe I'll split it up in half.
That's totally up to you, but all I'm saying is that there are expenses, but we also are just trusting God as an organization for those expenses to
For
be
that
met.
support.
And so far, it has been, so.
Okay.
So when did it, now I'm just being nosy.
Sure.
So when did they tell you to